Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, one of the nation's true great think tanks, to talking to Tom Karako, who is the nation's, or one of the nation's leading missile defense experts. Tom, always a pleasure seeing you, especially on such a hot and sweltering DC day.
Good to be with you.
Let's talk a little bit about Iran. Iran has demonstrated a rather impressive array of unmanned aircraft capabilities, to the point where in some of these incidents in the Strait of Hormuz, we've seen a little bit of a battle of a tit for tat over shoot downs of unmanned aircraft. Obviously, Iran shooting down the U.S. Navy RQ-4, the U.S. Navy responding USS Boxer by downing an Iranian drone. But let's talk a little bit about how Iran has weaponized its drone fleet and how it's actually using these unmanned platforms as precision weapons, as we saw in the case of the attack on the Japanese tanker, for example.
Sure. I mean, so at the level of the threat, I'll just say that there is a whole spectrum of lots and lots of threats. And the drones are more at the lower end there, but you're also seeing different kinds of anti-ship cruise missiles, different kinds of rockets and artillery, all of which have been used by the Iranians or their proxies in the last couple of years. So I would add to this, for instance, the use of some anti-ship cruise missiles against the USS Mason, the Aegis ship in, I think it was October 2016, just a couple years ago.
And that was off the coast of Yemen, if I remember correctly.
Right. But there again, these are folks that are working closely with the Iranians. And so what you seem to be seeing both in these most recent episodes with the drones, whether it's the Japanese, but also the Boxer, but then also with Yemen, is kind of using the platforms that are a little bit harder for us to defend against, or at least that we're not used to. And so look, the Iranians know they're not going to come up with some fancy fifth-gen aircraft. And so they've put their money in missiles and in different kinds of kind of drone technology. And what's interesting as well is that they're not just using lots of them, but they're using them in kind of a combined arms sort of way. They're mixing and matching these things to complicate our lives.
And talk to us about the drone in particular, whether it was in the Japanese instance or the one that Boxer downed, and the kind of kinetic capability that platform has.
Well, actually, that was a non-kinetic kill. This was a thing that reached out, and this is the Marines' anti-drone system. It was actually kind of a dune buggy that they put on top of the ship, for lack of a better option. And it kind of fried, or at least jammed, the drone or drones that were coming at the Boxer. This was, I think, last week. And so what you kind of see there is a flavor of the kind of lower cost solutions that the services are looking at, admittedly in so far it's kind of stovepiped approach. But there's so many of these things, and they're a threat to everybody. And so everybody's going to have to come up with some easily affordable solutions to protect forces wherever they are.
But in terms of the Iranian systems, right, I mean, once upon a time we would have looked on these systems of this class, this Hunter-sized airplane, as being a reconnaissance system, whereas now there's an element of doubt whether or not the Iranians, that it is a weaponized version of it. Talk to us about the class of drones that the Iranians have put munitions on and explosives on to use them as a rather precision strike weapon in that wider arsenal. And I have a broader question to ask you about how they're integrating that in their longer range precision strike capability.
Well, let me put it this way. You got to shoot at it before they take the shot, because you don't know if it's just going to stare at you with a camera or if it's going to drop a hand grenade on you. And of course, there have been those episodes in the past. And so the Boxer in that case had to be cautious, and once it gets close, they need to take it out, as it were. But in terms of the use, here again, I'll go back to the Yemen conflict, where the Houthis, the friends of the Iranians, are bragging and have bragged about their use of drones to target Patriot missile defense radars. Now, Patriots are very capable, and in principle, you can use them against drones, and they have been used against drones. Not necessarily what you want to, based on the cost of a Patriot interceptor, but they have that capability. But when you kind of have this, again, mixing and matching of drones and missiles and rockets all at the same time, it complicates our lives. And so they've used it concretely in episodes like that.
Talk to us a little bit about the missile defense systems that the Iranians have in service. Obviously, a lot of talk about triple-digit SAM capability that Moscow has provided them. In the RQ-4 case, what system did they use to shoot that down? And folks should know that the Global Hawk, it was an early model Global Hawk, not one of the newer versions of it, but it's a relatively altitude-limited airplane. It's not, as high-flying, for example, as a U-2 and some of the other preceding systems that we've had.
Oh, I slipped my memory here. It might have been the Buck. That might have been the same system they used against that airliner a couple of years ago. But I'd have to get back to you on that particular piece of it.
Okay. But talk to us about the integration of the low to the high end, which you mentioned a moment ago. Not a week goes by that we don't get bombarded by another drone defeat technology. Whether it's an RF jamming one, something that's got a net that can capture a device. What's the right way for countries to think about, in an integrated air and missile defense system, in an integrated air and missile defense network that everybody is looking to build that takes you from the low side to the high side? What's the right way for folks to be integrating these technologies? As you said, the Marines, that vehicle was in Quantico, I think, last year for Modern Day Marine. It was a very, very rapid development program, obviously paying dividends now. But what's the right way for folks to think about sort of that soup to nuts defense network?
Well, actually, I think you just pointed to it. But what you just pointed to is thinking about the full spectrum and thinking about it in an integrated way. And although it makes sense, kind of comprehensive air defense is how I would like to talk about it. That doesn't mean that we're quite putting all the pieces together in the way that we need to. But in principle, I think we kind of begin with the problem, with the threat, and that is that they can come at you with something at the very low and slow drone kind of a problem. They can come out with a cruise missile. They can come at you with a ballistic. And so it really is the threat of complex and integrated air attack that we're going to have to be concerned about across the board. I would say, again, these drones, they're kind of the poor man's cruise missile. It's not as if the low, and in that case, low and fast cruise missile problem hasn't been around, but this is a cheaper and a little bit more ubiquitous problem.
Are you impressed with the kind of capability the Iranians are demonstrating? We talked to Uzi Rubin of the Begin Sadat Center, legendary father, one of the fathers with the Yahya Ramadi of the Arrow missile system that was recently tested, and I'd have a question to ask you about that. But HETS-3 was tested in a partnership with Boeing and Israel Aerospace Industries, obviously up in Alaska very recently. But are you surprised at the sophistication of Iran's precision strike capability? Uzi was talking in our interview about the precision strike that Iran was able to mount on Kurdish Iranian commanders that were meeting in northern Iraq. Are you surprised at the kind of capability Iran has developed?
Well, so in that particular case, they sent ballistic missiles from Iran over into, I guess, some part of Syria. And exactly how precise it was, I think you can kind of debate. They did apparently have a drone monitoring it, right? The degree of information was being fed to the missiles. That's again a bit of speculation there, but I would actually signal that out as a little bit of combined arms, or at least battle damage assessment that was going on there. Look, I think the Iranians probably have a ways to go in terms of the precision of their long-range ballistics, but they're clearly fielding stuff that has some kind of terminal guidance. I mean, they're putting stuff out on the street that has the fins or different ways to guide it. How exactly it's being sent to its target, and whether that could be interfered with, again, non-kinetically. That guidance is only so good as its signal is uninterrupted. But yeah, it's not surprising, but they're coming along. And they're benefiting from the kind of commercial trends just like everybody else. But you're right, the Aero 3 last week, that was up in Alaska, another hit-to-kill kind of thing. It's getting harder and harder to be a hit-to-kill denier these days.
Well, talk to us about the importance of that test, because for many years, I covered the Patriot Arrow battles to the point where the United States basically had told Israel, okay, stop making the case that your system is better than ours. We did, the United States, and we as taxpayers helped invest in that system that does keep Israel secure. Boeing partnered with IAI in order to bring that technology to the United States because it's a very, very effective weapon. Do you see a role for the Arrow, and especially in the Arrow 3 version of it, to participate in U.S. national security and U.S. national defense?
Well, actually, I think it was Arrow versus THAAD back in the day. I could be wrong. You could be thinking of the PAC-3, but for a while there, Arrow and THAAD were kind of in competition. I think going back to the 80s, even late 1980s. I guess I would point out that the United States Army is buying 2 full-up batteries of Iron Dome. You're right, of course, that the American taxpayer has contributed to both the research and development and procurement of those systems for both the United States now and Israel. Whether we go to Arrow or not, I hadn't heard that one, but it's certainly a possibility, if not for the United States, maybe for other allies, in the sense that, as we're reminded by Turkey, the market for air and missile defense is there's a lot of that demand signal out there.
Is that, you just mentioned the S-400, is that as game-changing as everybody says it is? Because at the end of the day, the United States is operating, for example, in proximity with the S-400 system, for example, in Syria. There's a lot that we know about that system. We also know our own capabilities in order to defeat some of these systems. I mean, is it that big of a game-changing capability? I mean, it's certainly a lot of political messaging, but is it that game-changing a capability for Turkey to get the S-400?
I would say yes. It is a game-changing, but it's not an either-or. It is game-changing politically, but the fact that the U.S. or other folks fly F-35s near S-400, we also know that, and they know going into that. And it kind of comes down to, do you operate in your stealthiest mode and fly in front of it? The problem with the combination of the F-35 and the S-400 is that they can sit there and fly back and forth and really study the heck out of that thing, so they know exactly what the signature looks like. That is just a fatal combination, because everybody knows that if the Turks are doing that, given their political relationship with Russia, that information will be getting back to Russia in about 5 minutes from once they
well, there are Russian operators there, right? I mean, even though Turkey has said there are no Russian operators, I think it's going to be pretty clear there will be a couple of advisors who are going to be helping them out.
I have a bridge I'd like to sell you in Arizona.
I'll take the one in Manhattan as long as you have good terms. Apparently it goes to Brooklyn. What's the best deterrent now? I mean, right, we've gotten into a tit for tat. You and I talked before we started interviewing about whether or not it was the appropriate kind of exchange between the kind of drone that the Boxer downed, drones the Boxer downed, compared with an RQ-4 and the value of a strategic reconnaissance asset like that. What's the best way to be deterring Iran at this point from your standpoint? Or is this the environment we're going to be in where there's going to be a lot of tit-for-tat attacks going forward?
Well, you know, what you just said in terms of viewing the downing of a Global Hawk as a tit-for-tat with a couple, let's just call them Brickstone drones, is exactly the conclusion that we shouldn't be drawing here. These are just not even the same thing. And I would be loath to think that anyone would draw that conclusion. I wasn't thinking you were, but I'm worried that that's just exactly what folks will take away. Like, well, they got one of ours and we got one or two of theirs, so we're even. No, the Global Hawk's a pretty big and expensive system, and I'll just put forward the idea that if I was the Iranians and I went after a U.S. Global Hawk at that altitude, knowing fully well what I was doing, I would have baked in already the likelihood of U.S. reprisal in some way. That would have been the reasonable thing to expect. And so therefore, we have to, as much as kind of conventional wisdom quickly became, oh my goodness, it's so wonderful we didn't do that and go to war with Iran, I have to assume they expected a reprisal. And so the fact that we didn't respond, or the fact that the strike was called back, that is itself a signal to Iran. I wonder what the Iranians will take away from that. I worry that may encourage them to act more rationally the next time around.
Tom Karako of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, one of the nation's great missile and air defense experts. Tom, thanks very much. Always enjoy having you on.
Thank you, Vago.